The Kansas wind came like a sermon, long, hollow, and without mercy. It bent the wheat until the fields looked like waves under a sky too wide to care. Eli Mercer leaned on his shovel, listening to the ground breathe after the rain. He had no wife, no child, and a house that spoke only in creaks. What little voice he had left, he gave to the soil. Inside the cabin, a single photograph sat on the table, a woman holding a newborn wrapped in cloth. Both gone now, buried behind the barn under a sycamore that never bloomed. He didn't drink, didn't pray, didn't dream. Just worked. The storm that came that night was different, carried heat and the smell of iron. Thunder rolled low and steady like hooves beneath the earth. Eli closed the barn doors, checked the roof, and stood in the doorway watching the sky split white over the prairie. When it passed, the silence was sharper than before. Then came the faintest sound, a creak of wagon wood, half a mile out. He thought it thunder again, until he saw the black outline against the dying light. A wagon lay broken in the hollow, one wheel gone, canvas torn like paper. He ran toward it, boots sinking in the mud. The air smelled of smoke and blood. 2 horses dead. 3 men beside them, burned, faces unrecognizable. He lifted the canvas flap. A woman lay there, pale as rainwater, her dress torn, one hand clutching a silver ring. Her breath rattled like a match about to die. Eli knelt beside her. For a moment, he thought to turn back. This was no business for him. But her eyes fluttered open, green, wild, afraid, and found his. Something in them stopped him cold. He carried her in his arms through the storm's afterbirth, thunder fading, moonlight cutting through cloud, toward the only light left burning on the plains, the one in his cabin window. The wind had carried her to him. The silence had broken. He laid her on the narrow bed near the stove, rain still dripping from his hat brim. The cabin smelled of smoke, iron, and damp earth. Her skin was cold, the kind that warned of fever, and her breath came shallow, like she was trying not to disturb the air. Eli poured water from the kettle, tore a strip from an old shirt, and wiped the blood from her temple. Mud streaked her hair, gold under the soot. A bruise bloomed beneath her jaw, shaped like a man's hand. He looked away. She stirred once, mumbling something he couldn't catch. A name maybe. Then went still again. Through the window, lightning flickered over the plains, silent now, distant. He sat beside her with the quiet patience of a man used to waiting for crops to grow or storms to pass. Every now and then, he reached to check her pulse, rough fingers trembling just enough to betray him. When dawn came, pale and wet, she opened her eyes again. He'd fallen asleep in the chair, head tilted, hand still resting near hers. She blinked at the ceiling, confused, then at him. Where? Her voice cracked. Near Hollow Bend, he said softly, without moving. You're safe. She flinched at the word safe, as if it hurt to hear it. He poured her water, held it to her lips. She drank little, eyes darting around the small room, the stove, the worn Bible on the shelf, the coat hanging on the wall. No ring on his hand, no sign of a woman's touch. Just solitude dressed in wood and smoke. Rest, he said. You were hurt bad. She hesitated, searching his face for something, threat, pity, motive. Finding none, she let her head sink back into the pillow. Outside, the sky cleared into a hard blue. Steam rose from the wet earth, the land breathing again after its storm. He pulled a chair closer to the bed, kept his voice low. You ain't got to tell me nothin'. Just heal. Her eyes flickered open once more, studying him through the haze. Then, quiet as a promise, she whispered, "Thank you." He looked away, jaw tight, and busied himself with the fire, though both of them knew it wasn't the cold that needed tending anymore. Days passed like the slow thaw of winter. She healed, but the silence between them did not. It wasn't cruel silence, it was the kind that carried weight, like two people afraid to move too quickly in a room built from ghosts. He rose early, worked the field, came back with mud to his knees and windburn on his cheeks. She watched from the window, a blanket around her shoulders. Sometimes, she'd set water to boil before he returned. He never asked, never thanked her, but the look he gave the kettle said enough. By the week's end, she could stand. He found her outside one morning, barefoot in the wet grass, turning her face toward the sun as though to prove she still belonged to the living. Her hair had dried lighter now, her color returning. "You ought not be out," he said from the porch. "I was tired of walls," she answered, still looking toward the horizon. He nodded once, understanding more than he let on. Their days began to overlap, his chores became hers in small pieces. She learned to pour seed, to hold the plow steady, to wipe the sweat from her brow like someone who'd earned the right to. Once, while mending a fence together, she asked his name again, soft, like she wanted to be sure it was real. "Eli," he said. "Eli," she repeated, almost smiling. "Short for Elijah." He shrugged. "Don't matter much. Folks stopped callin' it long ago." She looked at him then, really looked, at the scar down his wrist, the small tremor in his left hand when he tied wire. "You don't talk like other men," she said. He paused, turned slightly toward her. "Ain't got much to say." Something in her expression shifted, a quiet warmth behind the fatigue. They stood that way for a moment, the wind tugging at their clothes, the grass whispering at their feet. Later, after supper, she left half her bread on the plate. He noticed. "You don't eat enough," he muttered. She looked up from the lamplight, eyes catching his. "You worry too much." He didn't reply, but his jaw clenched as he reached for the lantern. The flame flickered low, shadows dancing on the walls. Neither said it aloud, but both felt it, something moving beneath the stillness, slow and steady as roots under soil. The heat came early that year, dry and relentless. The river behind the ridge thinned to a slow trickle, and the air inside the cabin grew heavy with dust and breath. Even the silence felt tired. One night, long after the lamp had burned low, she spoke, voice barely a thread. "I remember fire." Eli didn't move. He sat near the hearth, boots off, one hand tracing the scar on his wrist. "They came after dark," she said. "I heard the horses first. My father's men thought they could fight, but they never saw the second wave coming." She stopped, swallowed. "I hid under the wagon. When the gunpowder caught, I thought the sky was falling." He lifted his eyes, slow and steady. "You lost family?" Her mouth twitched. "All but one. My father's still alive. He just doesn't know I am." Eli stared into the embers, jaw set. The crackle filled the space her words had left behind. "You were someone before this," he said quietly. She almost laughed. "Someone? I was a name on a ledger. A reason men made speeches." Her voice softened. "He's the governor of Missouri." The fire popped. He didn't flinch. "You don't have to worry," she added quickly. "No one would believe you'd found me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Ain't worryin' for me." Their eyes met across the orange light. Outside, the cicadas sang their endless dirge. Then, after a long pause, he said, "I killed a boy once." Her breath caught. He looked down at his hands, at the cracks of dirt in his palms. War. He couldn't have been more than 15. Rifle shook in his grip. "I fired first." He rubbed at his scar like it might change the ending. "Been trying to plant something worth keeping ever since." Neither spoke for a while. The night leaned in close. Finally, she said, "Then maybe we're both ghosts trying to live." Eli's eyes softened, grief and grace tangled in the same quiet look. The wind pushed through the window seam, stirring the lamp's flame. And for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel empty, it felt shared. The next morning brought dust clouds on the horizon, not wind, not weather. Riders. Eli saw them first while mending the fence line. He straightened, hand to his brow. 3 silhouettes cutting across the wheat, sunlight flashing on metal. He didn't move until they drew close enough for the sound of hooves to carry, that deep, hollow rhythm that always meant trouble. She came to the doorway, still in his old shirt, hair tied back. Her face went pale when she saw the men. "They're looking for me," she whispered. Eli didn't ask how she knew. He only said, "Go inside." By the time they reached the gate, he was already waiting. The tallest of the riders wore a black coat heavy with dust. The badge on his chest gleamed faintly in the sun. "Morning," the man called. "We're looking for a woman. Wagon train was hit 2 weeks back. Word as a survivor made it this way." Eli's hand rested near the post, steady. "Ain't seen anyone." The man's eyes slid past him toward the cabin. "That so?" She stood in the shadows just beyond the window, heart hammering. She could hear their voices through the crack in the door. "Name's Sheriff Ward," the man said. "Governor's offered a reward. Big one. For information." Eli didn't blink. "Don't care for rewards." Ward studied him a long moment, then smiled, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Strange thing. You live this far out, alone, and a woman goes missing right down the road. Some folks might think that's worth looking into." Eli's jaw flexed once. "Some folks talk too much." The tension thickened, heat shimmering between them. Finally, the sheriff tipped his hat. "If you do see her, tell her the world's been looking awful hard." They rode off slow, leaving only dust behind. Eli watched until they were gone. Then turned toward the cabin. She stood there, trembling, not from fear, but guilt. "I should tell them," she said, voice barely holding. "They'll come back if I don't." His gaze held hers, unflinching. "You can go if you want." Her eyes filled, anger and sorrow tangled. "That's not what I meant." "I know." He stepped closer, the space between them thick with everything neither had said. Outside, the last of the dust drifted over the fields like smoke from an old fire. The world had found them. And neither could pretend it hadn't. Night came heavy, thick with heat that wouldn't break. The air outside the cabin smelled of iron and sage. The horses shifted restless in the barn, they felt what was coming before he did. Eli sat by the window, rifle across his knees, lantern turned low. She paced the small room behind him, one hand pressed against her throat. Neither spoke. Every sound, a board creak, the wind against the eaves, landed like a question without answer. Then, far off, the dogs barked. Once. Then again. He stood, moved to the door. "Stay inside." She caught his arm. "You can't." He looked at her, eyes steady as dusk. "Ain't about can." When he stepped onto the porch, the horizon flickered with firelight, torches cutting through the dark. 5 riders this time, moving in a slow half-circle toward the house. The same badge among them. Sheriff Ward. "Evenin', Mercer." Ward's voice echoed, sharp as thunder. "Heard you been harborin' the governor's daughter." Eli didn't answer. He chambered around, the metallic click loud enough to travel. "She's worth more than this patch of dirt," Ward called. "You hand her over, you walk free. No one blames a poor man for wantin' a way out." Eli's voice came back low and even. "Ain't poor enough to sell what's good." The sheriff laughed once, bitter. "Then you'll die for a stranger." Lightning split the sky, brief, merciless. When it flashed, she saw him standing there, framed by the door, rifle steady, rain starting to fall in thin silver lines. Ward raised his hand. The first shot cracked. Splinters burst from the porch post near Eli's shoulder. He fired once, deliberate, no panic, no waste. One rider dropped. Then chaos met restraint, gunfire snapping through the storm, thunder answering each report. She ducked behind the stove, hands over her ears, whispering a prayer she didn't believe in. When it ended, the air smelled of wet gunpowder and rain-soaked dust. Ward lay still in the mud, hat washed from his head. The others had fled into the dark. Eli leaned against the doorframe, blood blooming through his sleeve. She ran to him, pressed her hands to the wound. "You're hit." He smiled faintly, a ghost of one. "Nothing fatal." Outside, the storm finally broke wide, rain pounding the roof, washing clean the dirt, the blood, the lie that either of them could go back to what they were before. He let her hold him, breath shallow against her hair. For once, the sound of thunder didn't feel like threat. It felt like truth. By morning, the rain had gentled into mist. The world outside lay washed and quiet, fence posts dark with damp, wheat bent under the weight of mercy. Smoke drifted slow from the chimney, rising into a sky the color of pale tin. Eli sat at the table, arm bound tight with cloth torn from her dress. She moved quietly around him, barefoot, hair unpinned, every motion deliberate. The kettle whistled once before she took it off the fire. Steam wrapped the room in warmth that smelled faintly of earth and ash. He didn't speak until she set the cup before him. "They'll send more," he said, voice low. She shook her head. "Not for a while." He looked up at her then, not the bruises or the torn sleeve, but the calm in her face, the kind that comes after choosing to live. "I could go," she said softly. "You wouldn't have to bear the weight of it." His jaw worked once before he answered. "That what you want?" She hesitated, eyes tracing the scar at his wrist, the dirt under his nails, the quiet strength of a man who never learned how to ask for anything. "No," she said finally. "It isn't." The fire popped. He reached for the cup, grimaced as his arm twinged, and she caught his hand without thinking. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The world seemed to balance there, two lives carved raw by loss, meeting in the small space between duty and grace. He looked at their joined hands, then at her. "World won't take kindly," he murmured. She smiled faintly. The world's had its say. Outside, the mist began to lift. Light touched the fields, weak at first, then widening, spilling over the wet grass until the land seemed to glow. He stood, slow and careful, went to the doorway. She followed, wrapping the shawl around her shoulders. Together they watched the horizon clear, the earth steaming like something reborn. "Storm did some good," he said. She nodded. "So did you." For a long moment, they stayed like that, side by side, framed in the soft gold of morning, their silence no longer hollow but full. The land that once mourned now breathed again, and for the first time in years, Eli Mercer let it breathe through him.